As British citizens, we are all aware that our fundamental right to free speech is under serious threat. The ability to express our thoughts, opinions, and concerns openly without fear of censorship or suppression is a cornerstone of any truly democratic society. Yet in recent years, we have seen a disturbing shift in how speech is being policed, particularly on social media platforms. In the United States, there has been significant pushback against these threats to free expression, especially following the previous administration. Efforts are being made to ensure that American citizens are not silenced by big tech companies, government overreach, or media bias. Now, we are beginning to see similar conversations emerging in the UK and across Europe as well. The tide is turning. In today's video, we'll be reacting to a key member of Donald Trump's team as they expose and challenge what is happening in the United Kingdom and across Europe. Their insights shed light on the broader battle for free expression and the urgent need to push back against growing censorship. But before we dive in, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more content like this. The new administration is turning its gaze on the rest of the world and calling out leaders, including ours, for the state of our country. Have a watch of this.
I heard his speech, and I tell you, you're talking about JD's speech, right?
Yes, sir.
I heard his speech, and he talked about freedom of speech, and I think it's true in Europe. They're losing their wonderful right of freedom of speech. I see it. I mean, I thought he made a very good speech, actually, a very brilliant speech. Yeah. Europe has to be careful. And he talked about immigration. And Europe has a big immigration problem. Just take a look at what's happened with crime. Take a look at what's happening in various parts of Europe. I thought his speech was very well received, actually. I've heard very good remarks.
This is the first part of J.D. Vance's speech, where he specifically calls out the UK.
And unfortunately, when I look at Europe today, it's sometimes not so clear what happened to some of the Cold War's winners. I look to Brussels, where EU commissars warn citizens that they intend to shut down social media during times of civil unrest the moment they spot what they've judged to be, quote, hateful content. Or to this very country, where police have carried out raids against citizens suspected of posting anti-feminist comments online as part of, quote, combating misogyny on the internet, a day of action. I look to Sweden, where 2 weeks ago the government convicted a Christian activist for participating in Koran burnings that resulted in his friend's murder. And as the judge in his case chillingly noted, Sweden's laws to supposedly protect free expression do not, in fact, grant, and I'm quoting, a free pass to do or say anything without risking offending the group that holds that belief. And perhaps most concerningly, I look to our very dear friends, the United Kingdom, where the backslide away from conscience rights has placed the basic liberties of religious Britons in particular in the crosshairs. A little over 2 years ago, the British government charged Adam Smith Connor, a 51-year-old physiotherapist and an Army veteran, with the heinous crime of standing 50 meters from an abortion clinic and silently praying for 3 minutes. Not obstructing anyone, not interacting with anyone, just silently praying on his own. And after British law enforcement spotted him and demanded to know what he was praying for, Adam replied simply, it was on behalf of the unborn son he and his former girlfriend had aborted years before. Now, the officers were not moved. Adam was found guilty of breaking the government's new buffer zones law, which criminalizes silent prayer and other actions that could influence a person's decision within 200 meters of an abortion facility. He was sentenced to pay thousands of pounds in legal costs to the prosecution. Now, I wish I could say that this was a fluke, a one-off crazy example of a badly written law being enacted against a single person. But no, this last October, just a few months ago, the Scottish government began distributing letters to citizens whose houses lay within so-called safe access zones, warning them that even private prayer within their own homes may amount to breaking the law. Naturally, the government urged readers to report any fellow citizen suspected guilty of thought crime. In Britain and across Europe, Free speech, I fear, is in retreat.
Following this, he spoke on mass migration. Have a watch of this.
I believe there is nothing more urgent than mass migration. Today, almost 1 in 5 people living in this country moved here from abroad. That is, of course, an all-time high. It's a similar number, by the way, in the United States, also an all-time high. The number of immigrants who entered the EU from non-EU countries doubled between 2021 and 2022 alone, and of course it's gotten much higher since. And we know the situation, it didn't materialize in a vacuum. It's the result of a series of conscious decisions made by politicians all over the continent and others across the world over the span of a decade. We saw the horrors wrought by these decisions yesterday in this very city. And of course, I can't bring it up again without thinking about the terrible victims who had a beautiful winter day in Munich ruined. Our thoughts and prayers are with them and will remain with them. But why did this happen in the first place? It's a terrible story, but it's one we've heard way too many times in Europe and unfortunately too many times in the United States as well. An asylum seeker, often a young man in his mid-20s, already known to police, rams a car into a crowd and shatters a community. How many times must we suffer these appalling setbacks before we change course and take our shared civilization in a new direction? No voter on this continent went to the ballot box to open the floodgates to millions of unvetted immigrants.
In other topic today, we have some huge news with regard to the Southport killer. And to be honest, it's news that many of you will not have wanted to hear. The Attorney General has announced that he will not be referring the sentence of Southport child killer Axel Rudakubana to the Court of Appeal, despite calls from victims' families and several MPS for a harsher punishment. Rudakubana, now 18, was sentenced in January to a minimum of 52 years behind bars after being found guilty of the brutal murders of 3 young girls at a dance class in Southport, Merseyside. The attack, which took place in July last year when Rudakubana was just 17, sent shockwaves across the country and led to renewed debates about sentencing laws for young offenders. The court heard how Rudakubana entered the Heartspace dance studio, where a Taylor Swift theme class was taking place, and carried out a frenzied and unprovoked attack. His victims, 9-year-old Alice Da Silva, Agia, 6-year-old Babe King, and 7-year-old Elsie, tragically lost their lives. He also attempted to murder 8 other children whose names have been withheld for legal reasons, as well as dance instructor Leanne Lucas and businessman John Hayes, who were caught up in the horror, despite the severity of the crime. Attorney General Lord Hermer KC confirmed on Friday that after reviewing the case in consultation with leading criminal barristers and the Crown Prosecution Service, he had concluded there was no realistic legal basis to appeal for a longer sentence. In a public statement, Lord Hermer acknowledged the gravity of the case, calling it a senseless and barbaric murder that had left the nation in shock. No words come anywhere close to expressing the brutality and horror. In this case, he said, the impact of this tragedy on the families of the victims, the survivors, and PLEMS, the wider community, is immeasurable. However, he stressed that any appeal must be grounded in legal precedent and that based on independent legal advice, there was no viable way to argue for a harsher sentence without risking a failed appeal. No one would want the families to be put through an unnecessary further court process where there is no realistic legal basis for an increased sentence, Lord Hermer added. His decision has sparked mixed reactions, while some legal experts agree that the 52-year minimum term is an exceptionally amplifiers. High sentence, others, including MPS and grieving parents, believe it does not go far enough. The case has reignited debates over sentencing laws for underage killers. At present, whole life orders the harshest punishment in English law, meaning a prisoner will die behind bars, are reserved for offenders aged 21 and over. In rare cases, they can be given to 18 to 20-year-olds, but never to those under 18. As a result, despite the shocking nature of Rudakubana's crimes, the court was unable to impose a whole life sentence. Instead, he received what is believed to be the second longest minimum term in English history and the longest ever handed to someone of his age. Southport MP Patrick Hurley had previously urged the Attorney General to review the sentence, arguing that it was unduly lenient and not severe enough for such a monstrous crime. A parent of one of the surviving children echoed these sentiments in an interview with The Sun, stating that Ruta Cubana should rot in jail and that the law needs changing. There has also been political support for reforms. Conservative leader Kemi Badenoch, alongside Shadow Home Secretary Chris Philp, has suggested that there is a strong case for allowing whole-life orders for under 18s in exceptional cases such as this one. Prime Minister Keir Starmer also weighed in at the time of sentencing, describing Ruta Cubana as a vile offender who will likely never be released. We understand that the families of the murdered children have been informed of the Attorney General's decision, while some may find solace in knowing that Ruta Cubana's sentence is one of the longest ever imposed. Others will undoubtedly feel frustrated that the legal system prevented an even harsher punishment. For now, the debate over whether sentencing laws should change continues. The Southport tragedy has left an indelible mark on the nation, and many will now look to the government to see whether legal reforms will follow in its wake. What are your thoughts on what we discussed in today's video? Let me know down in the comments, and make sure you hit the like and subscribe button for more British content.